Act 1. The Sighting. In the gray pre-dawn hours of March 16, 1943, the North Atlantic stretched endlessly beneath a lowering sky. 500 miles south of Iceland, with a protective air cover from Allied bases could not reach, Convoy HX 229A pressed eastward through heavy seas. 42 merchant vessels, American Liberty ships, British freighters, Norwegian tankers, steamed in 9 ragged columns, their hulls laden with aviation fuel, munitions, grain, and steel. The cargo represented the industrial output of a continent, bound for a Britain slowly starving under blockade. Each merchant ship carried the hopes and fears of its crew. The Liberty ships, mass-produced in American shipyards at the rate of 3 per day, were welded rather than riveted, a fact that made experienced seamen nervous. They knew that welded hulls could split catastrophically in cold water. The tankers rode low in the water, their holds full of high-octane aviation gasoline destined for RAF Bomber Command. A single torpedo hit would transform them into floating pyres. The freighters carried everything from canned food to tank parts, from lumber to locomotives. Every ton represented material that Britain desperately needed to continue the war. The convoy's escort seemed pitifully small, for corvettes, 2 destroyers, and a single rescue trawler. HMS Volunteer, the lead destroyer, rolled violently as she maintained station 2 miles ahead of the convoy's van. On her bridge, lookouts scanned the horizon through salt-caked binoculars, searching for the telltale feather of a periscope wake. Their eyes burned from sleeplessness and the constant sting of salt spray. Below decks, ASTIC operators hunched over their sets, listening through headphones for the distinctive ping echo that would betray a submerged U-boat. The technology was primitive, effective only to about 1,500 yards, useless in the thermal layers that form between different water temperatures, and completely blind to surface submarines. The corvettes, HMS Clematis, Primrose, Lavender, and Kingcup, struggled to maintain their screening positions in the heavy weather. These small vessels, designed originally for coastal patrol, pitched and rolled sickeningly in the Atlantic swells. Their crews, many of them merchant seamen hastily trained for naval service, fought constant seasickness while manning their stations around the clock. Each corvette carried a limited supply of depth charges and possessed a top speed barely faster than the convoy itself. In any prolonged engagement, they would be overwhelmed. 300 feet beneath the surface, Captain Lieutenant Werner Hartmann commanded U-221, a Type VIC submarine that had been stalking these shipping lanes for 11 days. The U-boat crept forward at 3 knots, running on electric motors to minimize noise. Inside the pressure hull, 44 men breathed recycled air thick with the smell of diesel oil, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of machinery. Condensation dripped from overhead pipes onto the men below, soaking their clothing. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the motors and the occasional creak of the hull under pressure. Every man aboard understood that the submarine was both their weapon and their tomb. The pressure hull, just 15 feet in diameter, contained everything needed to sustain life and wage war: torpedoes, batteries, diesel engines, provisions, freshwater tanks, and human beings crammed into every available space. Men slept in shifts, sharing bunks that were still warm from the previous occupant. Privacy did not exist. The head, the submarine's single toilet, could only be used when depth and sea conditions permitted, requiring a complex procedure involving multiple valves that, if operated incorrectly, could result in catastrophic blowback. In a cramped control room, Hartmann studied the plot. The hydrophone operator had detected the distant throb of multiple propellers, many ships moving slowly. The bearing remained constant. After 3 hours of patient tracking, periscope observations confirmed what Hartmann had hoped: a convoy, lightly escorted, far from air cover. Through the periscope, Hartmann counted the columns, 9 of them, with 4 to 5 ships in each column. He identified the escort types by their silhouettes. Corvettes and destroyers, spread too thin to provide effective coverage. He noted the convoy's base course, due east at 8 knots, and estimated the zigzag pattern they were using. The tactical picture crystallized in his mind. This was the moment U-boat commanders trained for. But Hartmann faced a dilemma encoded in the tactical doctrine hammered into every Kriegsmarine submarine officer. The wolfpack system depended on coordination. A single submarine might sink 2, perhaps 3 ships before the escorts drove it under and pinned it down with depth charges. But a coordinated pack of 8 or 10 U-boats, attacking simultaneously from multiple bearings, could devastate an entire convoy before effective countermeasures could be organized. The escorts would be overwhelmed, unable to pursue multiple contacts at once. The decision required a signal. Hartmann ordered U-221 to periscope depth. The submarine rose slowly, the diving planes angled upward, the electric motors straining. At 50 feet, he raised the periscope for a final visual sweep. No escorts in sight. At 20 feet, he gave the order, raise antenna. At 0447 hours, the submarine's antenna broke the surface. In the radio room, barely larger than a closet, Funkmeister Klaus Ritter activated the Kurzsignal transmitter, a burst transmission system that could send an encrypted message in less than 2 seconds. The brevity was essential. British high-frequency direction finding stations, known as HFDUF, could triangulate radio transmissions. A prolonged broadcast invited immediate retaliation. U-boats had been caught and destroyed while transmitting routine weather reports. Ritter had already prepared the message, encoding it using the 4-rotor Enigma M4 cipher machine installed in a wooden case bolted to the radio room bulkhead. The machine, with its rotating wheels and plugboard settings changed daily according to code books, produced encryptions that the Germans believed were unbreakable. The message was simple but complete. Convoy sighted. Grid square B, 4721. Course 090. Speed 8 knots. Forti plus vaisselle. Light escort. The signal burst into the ether at 0449 hours. Within seconds, U-221 dropped back to 60 meters and altered course, moving to shadow the convoy from astern. Hartmann's role now was to maintain contact without being detected, providing updated position reports every 4 hours, guiding the wolfpack to its prey. Act 2. The response. The transmission traveled at the speed of light across 1,800 miles of ocean to the Befehlshaber der U-Boot headquarters in Paris, where Admiral Karl Donitz commanded the U-boat arm with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The admiral understood what many in the German high command did not. Submarines could not win territory, but they could strangle Britain's maritime lifeline. Every ton of shipping sent to the bottom brought Churchill's island fortress closer to capitulation. Donitz had calculated the mathematics of victory with chilling precision. Britain imported 47 million tons of material annually. If U-boats could sink 700,000 tons per month, more than could be replaced by Allied shipbuilding, Britain would be forced to surrender within a year. In March 1943, the U-boats were approaching that target. Victory seemed tantalizingly close. In the operations room beneath Boulevard Suchet, staff officers plotted U-221's contact report on a massive wall chart of the Atlantic. Colored pins represented individual U-boats. Red pins marked confirmed Allied convoys. Blue pins indicated suspected convoy routes. 8 other U-boats were positioned within striking distance of Grid Square B, 4721. Together, they formed Rudel Tactic Group, Robgraph, wolfpack tactics perfected through bitter experience. The staff officers worked quickly, calculating intercept courses, fuel states, torpedo inventories. U-406 and U-615, operating 60 miles to the northeast, could reach attack positions by nightfall. U-91 and U-558, stalking independently further south, would need to run at maximum surface speed for 14 hours. U-260, low on fuel and bound for home, could participate in one attack before breaking off for Lorient. At 0515 hours, coded orders radiated from the powerful transmitters at Paris to submarines scattered across 1,000 square miles of ocean. The message was terse. Concentrate on Convoy Grid B, 4721. Attack at dusk. Hartmann maintains contact. U-boats began converging from multiple vectors. Deep in the Atlantic, commanders decoded the signal and plotted new courses. Diesel engines roared to life. Submarines surfaced and drove forward at 17 knots, their bows throwing sheets of spray, their exhaust stacks belching black smoke. The race was on. Every U-boat needed to reach attack position before darkness fell. Speed was essential, but it came with risk. A surface submarine was vulnerable to aircraft attack. The commanders pushed their boats hard. In the engine rooms, diesels hammered at maximum RPM, the noise deafening, the heat oppressive. Lookouts on the conning towers scanned the sky constantly, searching for the silhouette of a patrol aircraft. If a plane appeared, the submarine would have 30 seconds to crash dive before bombs or depth charges fell. It was a calculated gamble. Speed versus stealth, aggression versus caution. The wireless traffic did not go unnoticed. At Station X in Bletchley Park, England, cryptanalysts hunched over captured Enigma machines worked frantically to break the daily cipher keys. The breakthrough had come in 1941 when Royal Navy destroyers captured U-110 intact, along with its code books and cipher machine. Since then, British mathematicians led by Alan Turing had systematically broken German naval codes. But the process was not instantaneous. Sometimes it took hours or even days to decrypt messages. By mid-morning on March 16th, enough fragments had been decrypted to confirm the nightmare. A wolfpack was forming. The cryptanalysts could not read every message, but they understood the pattern. Multiple U-boats were converging on a single grid square. An attack was imminent. An urgent warning was transmitted to the Admiralty in London, then relayed to Western Approaches Command. But the warning came too late. Convoy HX 229 maintained strict radio silence, standard procedure to avoid detection by German radio direction finding equipment. HMS Volunteer would not receive the alert until the evening broadcast schedule at 1800 hours. By then, 9 U-boats would already be in position, submerged and waiting, their torpedo tubes flooded and armed. Act 3. The Gathering Storm. As afternoon deteriorated into evening, the weather worsened. A spring gale swept across the convoy from the northwest, driving rain horizontally across heaving seas. The barometric pressure dropped steadily. Waves built to 30 feet from trough to crest, their tops blown into streaks of foam by 50-knot winds. Visibility dropped to less than a mile. The sky merged with the sea in a gray chaos of wind and water. The merchant ships labored through the storm, their loaded hulls sluggish and unresponsive. Each vessel fought its own private battle with the elements. Cargoes shifted despite lashings. Hatches strained against the sea's weight. Steering became an exhausting ordeal as massive waves shoved the ships off course. Several vessels began to straggle, falling behind the main body of the convoy. The escorts raced back and forth through the storm, using signal lamps to urge the stragglers forward, firing green flares to mark the convoy's course. Every ship that fell behind became an easy target. On U-221, Hartmann maintained contact through the storm, surfacing periodically to take bearings. The submarine's low silhouette made it nearly invisible in the rough seas, just another whitecap among thousands. The conning tower lookouts lashed themselves to their posts, enduring the constant battering of wind and spray. Even if convoy lookouts spotted the U-boat, the range would be too great for effective gunfire, and the corvette's astic would be useless in the turbulent conditions. The thermal layers caused by the storm scattered sonar beams like light through frosted glass. By 1800 hours, 8 U-boats had reached their assigned sectors. They formed a loose arc ahead and to the flanks of the convoy, positioned to attack from multiple bearings simultaneously. Each commander studied the tactical situation through his periscope during brief, cautious observations. They noted the escort positions, too predictable, too widely spaced. They identified priority targets, the tankers first, then the ammunition ships, then the largest freighters. They calculated firing solutions, factoring in target speed, range, sea state, and torpedo running time. The plan was simple but devastatingly effective. At 2,100 hours, with full darkness and the moon obscured by storm clouds, the wolfpack would strike. No preliminary warning, no single point of attack. Instead, torpedoes would come from every direction at once, overwhelming the escort's ability to respond. In the gathering darkness, the U-boat commanders made their final preparations. Torpedo tubes were checked and rechecked. Firing solutions were entered into mechanical calculators. Escape routes were planned. Each commander reviewed the engagement procedure. Fire all bow tubes in rapid succession, then turn to bring stern tubes to bear. After expending all torpedoes, withdraw at maximum speed while the escorts were distracted. Act 4. The attack. At 2,103 hours, U-406 fired the first salvo. Oberleutnant Horst Dietrichs had maneuvered to within 800 yards of a 10,000-ton tanker, the SS William Ellery. Through his periscope, he could see every detail of the ship's silhouette: the bridge superstructure, the tall stack amidships, the deck machinery. He gave the order: Tube 1, fire. Tube 2, fire. Tube 3, fire. 3G7E electric torpedoes left their tubes in rapid succession, their wakeless tracks invisible in the darkness. The torpedoes were technological marvels, battery-powered, nearly silent, leaving no bubble trail to betray their approach. They ran at 30 knots, their depth set to pass 6 feet below the target's keel. The torpedoes carried 617 pounds of hexanite explosive in their warheads. Upon contact, a magnetic pistol would detonate the charge directly beneath the ship, breaking its back. 47 seconds later, the first torpedo struck the tanker amidships. The explosion was catastrophic. Aviation gasoline erupted in a fireball that illuminated the entire convoy, turning night into day. A mushroom cloud of flame rose hundreds of feet into the air, casting dancing shadows across the water. Men on nearby ships shielded their eyes from the glare, temporarily blinded. The heat was intense even at a distance of half a mile. The second and third torpedoes struck in quick succession, one forward, one aft. The William Ellery broke in half, both sections engulfed in flames. Burning fuel spread across the water in a wide pool. Of her crew of 63, only 8 would survive. Those who happened to be on deck when the torpedoes struck and were blown clear of the ship. The attack galvanized the convoy. Ships began zigzagging frantically, although their slow speed and heavy loading made evasive maneuvers nearly impossible. Helms were thrown hard over. Engine room telegraphs rang for emergency full speed. But the merchant ships were like wounded elephants. They could not run and could barely dodge. The escorts charged toward the attack bearing, their screws thrashing, firing star shells that burst overhead in cascades of white light, attempting to illuminate surfaced U-boats. HMS Volunteer opened fire with her 4-inch guns at a shadow on the horizon, pumping out 20 rounds in rapid succession, but scored no hits. 3 minutes after the first explosion, U-91 struck from the starboard flank. Captain Lieutenant Heinz Walkerling had positioned his submarine perfectly, lying in wait along the convoy's projected track. 2 torpedoes slammed into a Liberty ship carrying steel and locomotives. The impacts sounded like sledgehammers striking a kettle drum, a deep, resonant boom that carried for miles. The ship settled rapidly by the stern, her propeller rising from the water, still turning. Her crew abandoned ship in darkness and driving rain, launching lifeboats that were immediately swamped by waves. The rescue trawler, Northern Foam, turned toward the sinking vessel. Searchlights sweeping the water for survivors, crew members standing by with heaving lines and scramble nets. Then U-558 attacked from the port beam, exploiting the gap created when corvettes rushed to investigate the starboard attacks. A Norwegian freighter carrying grain exploded when a torpedo detonated beneath her keel, breaking her back. The ship's hull split with a sound like tearing metal. She sank in less than 4 minutes, plunging bow first into the Atlantic. Her stern rose vertically, her propeller thrashing air, then slid beneath the surface with a great rushing of displaced water. The convoy dissolved into chaos. Ships scattered in all directions, colliding with one another in the darkness. Two freighters sideswiped each other, tearing away railings and lifeboats. Another ship, attempting to avoid a burning tanker, steamed directly into the path of a corvette. Only desperate maneuvering prevented collision. Flares arced across the sky in emerald greens and brilliant whites, casting surreal illumination over the scene. Depth charges detonated as the corvettes prosecuted ASTA contacts, the underwater explosions sending geysers of white water 100 feet into the air, the shock waves rattling hull plates on nearby ships. But the contacts were fleeting. The U-boats would dive briefly when threatened, then resurface once the escort passed, like wolves circling a wounded herd. At 2,145 hours, U-615 torpedoed a 12,000-ton ammunition ship carrying bombs, artillery shells, and small arms rounds destined for the British Eighth Army. The explosion was apocalyptic. The ship vanished in a blinding flash visible for 30 miles, leaving only a rapidly expanding fireball and a concussion wave that struck like a physical blow. The blast wave capsized two lifeboats full of survivors from earlier sinkings and shattered windows on ships a mile away. Fragments of steel, some weighing hundreds of pounds, rained down across a quarter-mile radius, punching holes through decks and superstructures. The explosion was so violent that seismographs in Iceland registered the shock wave as a minor earthquake. Through the night, the slaughter continued with methodical precision. U-260 sank a refrigerated cargo ship carrying frozen meat from Argentina. The ship went down quickly, her refrigeration compartments flooding, her crew scrambling for lifeboats. U-221 Hartmann submarine fired 4 torpedoes at a cluster of 3 ships steaming close together, scoring hits on 2. A Greek freighter and a British collier went down within sight of each other, their crews swimming through oil-slicked water thick with debris and the bodies of their shipmates. The water temperature was 38 degrees, cold enough to kill a man in 20 minutes. U-384 attacked for the convoy's rear, torpedoing a straggler that had fallen 2 miles behind. The ship, already damaged by heavy weather, sank in 8 minutes. Her crew had only enough time to launch a single lifeboat before the ship rolled over and disappeared. U-530 penetrated the convoy's center, brazenly surfacing among the merchant columns, and fired into the packed ships at point-blank range. 2 vessels were hit before the U-boat crash-dived to escape pursuing corvettes. The escorts fought desperately, but they were overwhelmed. HMS Volunteer depth-charged U-91, forcing the submarine to dive to 250 meters, close to the crushing depth for a Type VIC. Inside the U-boat, the pressure hull creaked and groaned under the strain. Light bulbs shattered. Cork insulation flaked from the overhead. Men held their breath, waiting for the hull to implode. But Walkerling held his nerve, maintaining depth for 30 minutes until the destroyer moved away, then surfaced and resumed the attack. The corvette HMS Clematis illuminated U-406 with her searchlight and opened fire with her 4-inch gun, forcing Dietrichs to crash dive with shells exploding in the water around his conning tower. But there were too few escorts and too many submarines. The U-boats simply waited until the corvettes raced past, then surfaced and resumed the attack. Act 5, The Dawn. By 0400 hours on March 17th, the attack was over. The U-boats, low on torpedoes and fuel, began withdrawing to the west and south, diving to depth to avoid dawn patrol aircraft. They had expended nearly all their weapons, 73 torpedoes fired, with 37 hits confirmed. The convoy, what remained of it, reformed at first light under leaden skies. Of the original 42 ships, 13 had been sunk. More than 90,000 tons of cargo rested on the bottom of the Atlantic, along with 412 merchant seamen. The survivors steamed eastward through fields of wreckage that stretched for miles in every direction. Oil slicks, thick and black, covered vast patches of ocean, the petroleum gleaming with rainbow iridescence. Lifeboats and rafts drifted among scattered debris, shattered timbers, empty life jackets. Floating cargo crates split open to reveal their contents, personal belongings, photographs, letters from home. Bodies floated face down, arms outstretched, rolling gently in the swell. The rescue trawler searched for hours, pulling exhausted men from the water. Many were already dead from hypothermia. The water temperature was 38 degrees. Others died despite rescue, their core body temperatures too low to recover. Some men had survived the sinkings only to drown from exhaustion while waiting for rescue that came too late. On the merchant ships that survived, crews gathered on deck in stunned silence, watching the search operations. Some men wept openly. Others simply stared at the wreckage, processing what they had witnessed. The knowledge that they had survived through luck rather than skill was difficult to accept. A torpedo aimed at one ship had missed and struck another. A U-boat commander had fired at a target that disappeared in a rain squall, causing him to select a different victim. Survival was random, arbitrary, cruel. On U-221, now 300 miles from the battle scene, Hartmann composed his after-action report in the cramped commander's niche that served as his cabin. The submarine had expended all 14 torpedoes, 6 from bow tubes, 2 from stern tubes, and 6 reloads. Hartmann claimed 4 ships sunk, totaling 32,000 tons. The claims would later be verified by B. Dienst Intelligence, analyzing British wireless traffic. It was U-221's most successful patrol. In the cramped control room, crew members scratched another row of silhouettes on the bulkhead, tiny ship symbols representing their victories. Each silhouette was carefully drawn, representing a ship sent to the bottom. But no one aboard spoke of the men who had drowned. But in the broader strategic picture, something had changed. The Battle of Convoy HX 229 represented the high-water mark of a U-boat campaign. Within weeks, Allied countermeasures would begin to turn the tide in ways the Germans could not anticipate or counter. Long-range B-24 Liberator aircraft equipped with cinemetric radar would close the mid-Atlantic air gap, making it suicidal for U-boats to operate on the surface during daylight. Improved radar operating on 10-centimeter wavelengths could detect surface submarines in any weather, rendering darkness and storms ineffective as cover. Additional escort carriers would provide air cover, with aircraft that could hunt U-boats aggressively. And a systematic breaking of German naval codes at Bletchley Park would allow convoys to be rerouted away from known wolfpack positions. The wolfpack that destroyed HX 229A would itself be hunted to extinction within months. Of the 9 U-boats that participated in the attack, 7 would be sunk before the year ended. U-406 would be destroyed by depth charges from HMS Spey on April 12th. U-615 would be sunk by U.S. aircraft on August 7th. U-91 would be caught on the surface by a Royal Navy Sunderland flying boat and bombed on February 25th, 1944. U-221 would be depth charged and destroyed off Iceland on September 27th, 1943, by corvettes HMS Sunflower and HMS Snowflake. Hartmann and his entire crew of 44 men were lost. Their bodies were never recovered. The signal's legacy, the destruction of Convoy HX 229, illustrated the brutal mathematics of the Battle of the Atlantic with crystalline clarity. A single encrypted transmission, 2 seconds of radio traffic, had triggered a coordinated assault that sent 13 ships and 412 men to the bottom. The Wolfpack system, perfected by Donitz and his commanders through years of trial and error, represented the apex of submarine warfare doctrine. It was elegant, ruthless, and terrifyingly effective. But the system contained a fatal vulnerability that would ultimately doom it. It required radio communication. Every signal transmitted was a potential death sentence. The Huff-Duff stations grew more numerous and more accurate, able to triangulate submarine positions within minutes. The codebreakers at Bletchley Park worked their miracles with increasing speed, sometimes breaking daily cipher keys within hours. And the Allies developed tactics specifically designed to exploit the Germans' need to coordinate by radio, hunter-killer groups that would home in on submarine radio transmissions and prosecute contacts relentlessly. In the end, the Wolf's signal became a double-edged weapon. It could summon the pack, but it also betrayed the pack's presence. The very technology that made the wolfpack possible also made it vulnerable. German commanders were faced with an impossible choice: maintain radio silence and operate ineffectively as isolated units, or coordinate and risk detection. By May 1943, just 2 months after the destruction of HX 229, U-boat losses had become unsustainable. In that single month, 41 U-boats were sunk, more than in any previous month of the war. The casualty rate among U-boat crews reached 75%. Donitz, faced with the annihilation of his force, temporarily withdrew his submarines from the North Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic had turned decisively in favor of the Allies. The submarines never regained their dominance. By war's end, 783 U-boats had been sunk, and more than 30,000 German submariners had died, a casualty rate higher than any other branch of any armed service in World War II. The wreckage of Convoy HX 229A remains on the ocean floor, scattered across miles of the Atlantic seabed at depths exceeding 12,000 feet. The rusted hulls of Liberty's ships and U-boats alike rest in the darkness, silent monuments to the men who fought and died in the cold waters of the North Atlantic. The war they fought was decided not by heroic charges or brilliant maneuvers, but by signals transmitted in fractions of seconds, by mathematics and logistics, by the grim calculus of tonnage sunk versus tonnage built. A single signal had doomed a convoy, but in the end, it was the Allies' mastery of signals, intercepting them, decoding them, triangulating them, that doomed the wolfpacks themselves.